The word why. What a curious word. The kind of word that can make us cringe, feel defensive, or even distant. But you know, sometimes why is the key. A key that can unlock so much to our lives. Join me as we explore the why with fascinating contributors to the world, those that entertain us, inform us, teach us about life, and if we're lucky, inspire the next in all of us. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and welcome to HeadRoom, a production of Rainlight and co-produced by Old Soul. Let's go.
For those that listen to my podcast, you know that I just am an absolute sucker for people that care about others, that think deeply, I think, and thoughtfully about leadership and really agency and the role our own voice plays in the way in which we impact those that are around us. And so I'm just a big fan of people who are doing that. Sometimes they do it in the shadows. Sometimes we don't know about them or we need to know about them. And my next guest is someone that a number of people know and has had tremendous success. But I think he's someone that more of us should know about because there's a humanness, there's a frailty that is embraced and humbleness that is exhibited that is incredibly important, especially in sort of these critical moments in our society, not just here in the US, but abroad. So I'm happy to welcome into the show Greg Zlevor. Greg is the president and founder of Westwood International. He has over 25 years of experience in executive leadership development and education, and he served as a coach, consultant, and facilitator for companies across Europe, Asia, North America, South America, and Australia. He is also an 8 times best-selling author. He has worked with Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, General Motors, General Electric, Volvo, Cardinal Health, just to name a few. And probably even, I would imagine, we're going to get into this with Greg, but his pride and joy is Hope Makers Collective. And so, Greg, we talked off air, and those that know you, you can imagine, I'm looking at Greg and he's got his, what I would call his famous red glasses on. And what I love about that is it says something about personality, about a willingness to put oneself out there and create conversation. And I know from your TEDx talk, which I recommend for people to check out, I think as a dad, I was sharing this with you, Greg, that it hit on so many notes for me. But the layers went even deeper than that, not just being a parent and some of the stories that you relate, but also in trying to at least live a life above board and potentially with impact. Let's start from the beginning. Let's go back to where this originated for you, this cause, concern, and the action-oriented element of your personality. Kitchen table talks when you were growing up. Were you a part of the discourse? Were you an observer? Walk me through an early sort of experience or the general experience of watching you at a kitchen table during a discussion with your family.
Yeah, boy, that's an interesting question because for the most part, we didn't talk a lot because I had 3 younger brothers and we were fighting over the food. But I think some of the earliest memories and why I came to this point and why I am where I am today, it's fascinating. Recently, and when I say recently, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've run into several people who have had near-death experiences, and it's just come up in conversation. And it turns out my first childhood home was in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And when I was somewhere in nursery school, first grade, friends of mine dared me to walk across a dam. And I did. I walked across the dam. And lo and behold, I fell off. And fortunately, I fell on the water side, not the rushing water rock side. And I recall being underwater and seeing the green and the gold and being completely at peace. Like I have no recollection of any panic whatsoever in that experience. And then the next moment I recall was a gentleman asking me if he'd give me a ride home. Now, I've never connected that experience with my kind of humility or comfort with life and trust. But as I've talked to other people who've had near-death experiences, I think that experience had a lot to do with where I am right now and the way I approach life. And so kitchen table talk going way back when, that's probably the first experience I can point back to. It's had a significant impact. And even for me consciously, I'm not completely conscious of the impact that's had. I'm actually just putting some pieces together based on what other people have told me about their near-death experience and how it's changed and shaped them.
What a powerful story. And immediately, this dates me, but immediately made me think of the movie Stand By Me and walking on the railroad and realizing, oh, there's a train coming for us. And yet you had these, I guess, friends at that point that were daring you to do something that really was dangerous in that moment. Greg, walk me through your relationship to your own voice, because
Mm,
what I think is interesting and what resonated with me in listening to your TEDx talk and doing some other research on you is that there's this, I think we live in a world where, we can add filters to pictures,
mm,
we can edit our lives. And yet my experience of you is that you're, you're not afraid of the edit at all. In fact, you actually embrace a little bit of the messiness, and
mhm.
that in the messiness reveals maybe that moment. And really, maybe you just said it, but it's almost like that moment under the water, the piece of going,
Mm,
okay, here's where I am. I understand sort of the context of my current circumstance and situation,
mm,
and for better or worse, I'm going to hopefully learn from it and not run from it.
mhm.
Do you feel that this has been something that you've been honing along the way, or did you find that you had, whether it was audiences that were listening to you or within business deals and transactions and building, that there was a level of magnetism that
Mm.
people experienced with you because of that approach in a way that said, I'm not perfect, I'm not porcelain, right? There
Mhm.
are cracks here. I have faltered, and I'm okay leaving that on the table here amongst us.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, I get the comment a lot that people feel like they're like during the meeting or during the training program or the leadership development program or during the mastermind or event that I'm facilitating, they felt like they were sitting on the couch talking to me, like in the living room. And I take that as a compliment. I appreciate that very much. One of the things that I have had to learn is that me not being clear and standing up, because you asked the question, what's the relationship with me and my voice? Me not listening to my voice enough and being clear about my voice and standing up for my voice and quieting my voice so that other people can be happy and not uncomfortable has been one of the ways that I've brought probably the most pain in the world. And I've learned that me trying to be nice to other people and not stand up on the surface looked good, but in the long term actually created more pain and difficulty and was not kind at all. And so part of what I've learned to do is to both be kind and transparent. And that's been an ongoing journey.
Would you say it's an art or a science or a mixture of both?
I would say a mixture of both. And the science part is in my research, I can see some of the places where I've created the most pain is because I didn't stand up for my voice and what was going on for me early enough and at the beginning. That's kind of just my own personal research science. Um, the art is how to do that. What does that look like? And how can I do that in a way that allows people to continue to have their voice and the space for us to have a dialogue where they don't get defensive? That part has been an art. But I'll give you two examples. So, in a business situation, I went into a large law firm in New York. And in this afternoon, quote unquote, workshop conversation I had with a leading partner and his team, they wanted to create more dialogue and more connection as a team because they felt like everyone was working very individually. There was a lot of tension in the office, etc. So I put together a workshop exchange on that. To kick things off, the partner says, look, and he points to the 7 or so other people in the room. He said, I've not been happy with your work. Matter of fact, some of you have been disappointing me. And if you don't pick it up, I have people behind you who are going to pick it up. So start putting in the extra time, the extra effort. And if I don't see it, it's going to be a problem. And then he says, oh, and by the way, I just want to let you know, I've got to leave this workshop early. I got to fly home for my kids' event. I want to get to my child's event and things. So pick it up and follow through and put the extra time in. And the whole juxtaposition of That just struck me. So the partner then turns to me and says, okay, let's get started. And I turned to him and the rest of the group. I said, great. I said, I've got a 3-4 hour outline here. I said, we can go through it. And I can take you through the concepts of what it means to have equal voice, have a team, the 5 points of a successful team, etc. I said, or we can talk about what you just did and discuss how people at the table feel about that and how we sort that out and if there's any conflicts. I said, would you rather do the work or would you rather talk about doing the work?
Yeah, theory versus application, right?
Reverse application. And the partner was kind of like, he just did a little tilt. He went, oh, do the workshop. I was like, okay, I'll do the workshop. And it was in that moment when I made that choice, I realized I'm probably risking losing a client. Right? I realized that. And I also realized if we don't do the work, we can't get as far as we possibly could. We miss a whole bunch of potential. Well, that lesson, the ability to make that choice in that moment, has taken me years to get to. And that is part of the art. And then we did a great 3-hour workshop. Like it was no problem to me that they didn't want to, they want to talk about the work versus actually jumping in and potentially doing this work. Because that's where some people need to start. But my ability to put both opportunities on the table for them and for them to consider it, my hunch is he's still thinking about that.
So one of the, I think, powers you wield is and it's probably why people give you, or one of the reasons they give you the feedback, that it feels as if they're sort of sitting right there with you in a living room. There's a Midwest sensibility about you. And I think a lot of that can be attributed even to language that we use, in the way in which language is delivered. We can be sort of the classic stereotypical academic that keeps people at a distance. We create a bit of a moat and mystery so that you never get too close, but you always feel the power differentials in your favor if you're that individual. We live in a world now where trust is tough to come by. It feels as if, and language plays a big role in that. What advice do you have for leaders when we talk about hope, right? And I want to learn more about hope makers for everybody, but how do we understand creating the space in our own mind for inclusion, for equitable representation, and how can we be thoughtful in the language that we use? Because sadly, I think a lot of the language we use is what's been embedded in us from day one, the environments that we're in, and we may not even realize the language that we're using and the impact that that language can have on other people, other audiences. How should we understand creating that room as if we're adding more or different furniture to an existing environment?
Yeah, so there's a wonderful story I heard about this team several years ago that created tech that on the phone would work while it was in your pocket. And they thought it was like just the coolest thing. And I don't recall how many people were on the team, 8 to 12 people. And they were just the finish of the project. And then one gentleman had to drop off, and a woman came on the team and was the first woman on the team. And she finally, at like one of the last meetings, said, this is great technology, but who has pockets? And everyone looked at her like, what do you mean? Everyone has pockets. She said, no. She said, women don't have pockets. And the whole team realized it was all based on their bias and their experience. And they had left out half the population who, for a lot of part, doesn't have pockets. Now, inclusion, I think one of the best ways to practice inclusion is just beginning to understand that my perspective is only my perspective. It's not truth. It's not fact. It's it's my place of seeing the world. And as soon as I understand that and live that more deeply, and I'm not just talking about as a concept, but viscerally, it allows me to be more curious, to understand the other person's perspective and to find out why they have the position they do. And if I really get caught, and sometimes I get triggered by certain people, like entitlement's a big thing for me. If someone comes in really arrogant or entitled, it just triggers me. I'm like, what the? I have to look for the 5%. I have this little thing, if I can think of it, I'm like, look, I'm triggered by them. I don't like this personality. But at least 5% of what they're saying is right. Let me look for the 5%. So I have this little 5% rule. If I'm on and it can find that rule, I'll practice that. Now, in the midst of a conversation with either someone who I find really difficult or someone who I really enjoy working with, anywhere on that continuum, if as I continually go through, I can find out and ask what their position is and why they have that position, and state my position while owning my position, and there are no character attacks, we have a really good chance of building something that's new and different and bigger than us. And that type of dialogue creates a lot of trust, that back and forth. But those components, and I think one of the challenges I notice is it takes a lot of maturity to be able to have that. And most people aren't willing to work on the maturity to have that perspective and to practice that way of dialoguing or conversing. It seems like in even just the last 5 to 10 years, that people are more interested in finding the tribe, getting in their echo chamber. And if they find someone else outside of their tribe or echo chamber, just try to say it loudly or more obnoxiously or stronger to try to get their point across. And I think it's a big loss for us, for companies, for our country, for the world, to have that be the trend.
I love that 5% rule. And when we talk about practice, it makes me think two things. One, I want to talk about sort of leadership development and education and how we prepare the next generation, because I think the data is starting to emerge in some pretty profound ways that I believe tells us we really need to think about the way in which we're educating and hopefully supporting the next pool of talent that will serve as leadership and whatever that looks like. We really don't have an opportunity, I don't think, at least in our current society, to practice something like a 5% rule earlier on. And I wish we would. I look at my young kids and, dinner table talk about kitchen table talk, it's either or, black or white. Like we want to organize information in really tight knit sort of boxes that we can throw up on a shelf. The 5% rule sort of opens that up. It's like a great mystery story where you see that there's a secret, sort of room behind a bookcase, right? That you go, wait a minute, what if we dive in and understand that 5% to your point?
Mm-hmm.
How does that apply then when we think about educating the next crop of leaders? Because I'm looking at sustainability data. There's a great company that I would encourage you check out. It's called, you might enjoy it. It's called Window, Windo. The former chief data officer of JP Morgan started it. And they're aggregating all kinds of data on the top companies around the world and what Gen Z is looking at. They're taking the time in the first 5 years, those that leave their first job, they're not leaving because of the pay. They're leaving because the company that they're working for, that they're leaving, doesn't align with their value set.
Right.
Well, that would tell me that we have to do a better job of understanding not the 95%, but the 5% to your point. And so,
Mm-hmm.
with that as sort of the preamble, how do you think about the way in which leadership education, formally and maybe informally, should be maybe reconfigured or I don't know, reconstructed to match an environment that is remote, that is hybrid, that is global, that's personal?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of points in there. And it's fascinating to me. Just a couple quick experience I've had recently. A young person called me and said, Greg, thanks for all the mentoring. I just want to let you know I finally quit my job. I'm like, oh, great. I said, where are you going to go work? And they're like, oh, I don't have a job yet. I was like, what? Like, you quit your job, you don't have another job to go to? Like, no, no, it just didn't fit for me. So I had to quit. Like, I would have never have done that.
Yeah, that's not our generation, is it?
Not our generation. This generation has a whole different standard. And what's flipped is people, it used to be where companies had the power. And if I hire you and give you a salary, what's the ROI on you and on that me paying you? That's flipped now. And now people coming in saying, what's the ROI for me for giving you my time and energy?
Right. Right.
And now people coming in saying, what's the ROI for me for giving you my time and energy? That's flipped now. And now people coming in saying, what's the ROI for me for giving you my time and energy? That's flipped now. And now people coming in saying, what's the ROI for me That formula is completely flipped. And I think there's a lot of companies and leaders who haven't and don't understand that formula is now reversed, especially for people who are really talented. Second, in terms of the training, it is unbelievable to me that this generation coming in is one of the most isolated and most psychologically challenged generations ever. I mean, they're showing all kinds of psychological challenges and dysfunctions, etc., that past generations haven't, and all different types of research. And part of it is the isolation. And COVID didn't help. And so now you have a body, a system that's wired for being social. We've just been through a period where people had to be isolated. We are developing technology where we can be more and more isolated. And even though the material life is increasing for a good part of the population, not all, but for a good part, our mental health is going down. So there's something about our mental health which directly affects our ability to be productive, have meaning, have purpose, have connection, that is not tied to material wealth.
And
So
isn't
what
there
is
great irony in that, Greg? Because we didn't grow up with social media. We didn't grow up in that, sort of this Facebook era where every sort of family picture that people put up of their vacations looks so bright, sunny, and free of conflict, which I don't think is the case unless I live a very unique family life. And yet, like, we didn't grow up with that. They do,
Mhm.
and they're living a life of isolation where they have access to information that we, at the touch of it's instantaneous. And
Mhm.
I think we would have thought, oh, that would have a positive impact. But if anything, it feels like it's pushing away. And I'm just wondering where the hope fits into that sort of calculus.
HeadRoom is produced by Old Soul, a one-stop marketing agency that understands the power of brand and nuance. Reach out to my guy Matt at Old Soul and supercharge your brand and content strategy. That's Old Soul. Shoot Matt a note at aoldsoul.com. That's AOLDSOUL.com. And now, back to our guest.
Yeah, I don't know if this will be true or not, but my hunch is there's going to be less and less trust with things online. News, pictures, videos, songs, etc. There's going to be more value in face-to-face, going to the concert, watching the author read their poem, going to a workshop or an event that's faced. I think those are going to become more and more valuable. And actually, artists are going to be forced to do that, at least as the financial trend shows. That's where they're going to make most of their money now. Right. So now, with this generation coming up, how do we help them be better at interacting and being a part of a collective that's face to face? The other fascinating thing is that people do better work for people they know and care about.
Isn't that a funny thing?
Yeah. And if, like, I saw, I don't recall what book it was in, but there was this research on radiologists that if they just took a picture of the person and put their head like a little, almost like a passport photo on the folder, radiologists would give 20 to 30% more in-depth comments than if it was just a manila folder with the person's name on it. Like even just a picture so I connect to the person means more. So from a collective perspective, like when we design and run leadership programs, a lot of people miss that designing those interactions so that people can learn to understand each other better, have more of a connection, and care for the relationships in the room as much as their own personal learning and growth. That's just as, if not more valuable than the content that's being delivered in the leadership program. And so part of what I do when I custom design programs for large companies or groups is we custom design the interactions both within the group and between the group who's in the program and outside to try to build that network.
And you know what that says to me, Greg? Just, I
Yeah.
want to highlight this for people. What you just said there, to me, an important or an element of value in what you just said is that by doing that, you are injecting context. And I think that sometimes in life, we ignore the power of context,
Mm.
right? Because if you just are sort of off the shelf, you can do so. But what you're missing is the context of potentially the time that we're in, events that either just happened or we're on the precipice of. That's so important, I think, for people to connect. That to me ties to seeing a picture for a radiologist before they walk into the room,
Mm.
right? It's that just subtle element that says, I care about you. Like when I go back to my mental health days, when I
Mm.
worked with patients and clients, even if you would say something subtle, if you come into the room and you say, I thought about you the other day when I was at the grocery store. It's
Mm.
an amazing, it's like an elixir to know that somebody thought of you when you were not present. There's something about that connection, human to human, that is incredibly powerful. So I just want to highlight for people that when you're saying that, I see immense value in or injecting that context in. That's very unique in that regard. I think we're always looking for something that we can just replicate, right? We can, scale and scope, and we miss the nuance. And it sounds like you're embracing the nuance.
Exactly. I mean, we just did a face-to-face leadership program for a client on the West Coast, and the buyer, and we're in this program training upper level management to work across silos because a lot of times in the function of the silos, people get caught and they don't work across to see the full business and how the full business needs to be approaching the marketplace. So we're breaking down those silos, building those connections. The person at the end of the program started to cry. I was kind of surprised. And she said, God, this has been such a great week. I'm sad to go back to work. And I was like, what do you mean sad to go back to work? She says, well, I'm going to miss all the people. I'm like, well, these are the people you work with. She says, yeah, but I get to meet them here in a different way than I do while I'm at work. And part of the magic of an organization to really make an impact and difference in the world is to create more opportunities and pockets like that so that people are more connected and more caring about the people they work with and the cause they're working for. So everyone's getting ROI all the way around. And people are looking for the easy path of putting things online, asynchronous, quick bites, little tips, a method here, a tool there, and they forget what's behind the curtain. And that still what's behind the curtain is the most powerful.
Yeah, we
And
don't.
so,
We're not a series of. We're not walking around as apps. Like you can't find a quick solution that you can download. It. I can absolutely understand the power of what that participant, what she said to you in that regard. Help people understand. Tell me about Hope Makers Collective. Tell me about sort of the demographic of those that participate and what maybe variables they share if you sort of look from a high level, and who should be thinking more thoughtfully about participating in that manner.
yeah, I mean, Hope Makers, interesting backstory. We had a large global company come to us and say, look, can you train our 50,000 people to bring hope to the world while we deliver our products, our healthcare products? And it was great. It was a wonderful proposal. I think they asked 8 or 9 different companies to do it, to give a pitch. And we came down to the final decision. It was between us and a large household name consulting company. And we had it in 3 phases. Phase 1 was training the 50,000. Phase 2 was taking people from the 50,000 and then training their vendors and suppliers to bring hope to the world. So they have a whole ecosystem of hope. And then phase 3, and I told all the authors, thought leaders, artists, etc., were part of the initial phase 1 and 2. Whatever you give to this program, be ready to give it away, because in phase 3, we're going to give it to college students all over the world so they can bring hope to the world. So it was literally a 5-year plan to bring hope to the whole world. And the company was like, we are so inspired by this, but we're realizing it's a bit too big for us. We got to stick with our 50,000. I was like, okay, I mean, I get it. It's business, you got to do the trade-offs. So I went back to the group of about 100 global authors, thought leaders, et cetera, that we had put together. And lo and behold, half of them said, no, this was too much fun. We've got to stay together and keep working.
That's a really good problem to have, Greg.
Oh, I thought the whole thing was going to fall apart, right? Because no more money, no more interest. And so now we meet twice a year where authors, artists, coaches, facilitators come together and talk about how can we bring more hope to the world. And so if someone is forward thinking, if they don't necessarily have to be involved in business, even though we have a business emphasis, like how do teams and organizations work better? And they follow our values. So if someone leads with listening, appreciating what's working, and wants to serve. And then from there, think big, think together, and then MGSH. Go make good shit happen. those are our 5 values. And so if
And
they
go to a Brewers game. I know you're from Milwaukee, and grab a beer and a brat.
You're in a brat, right? And so if you're willing to follow those 5 values and you want to come and be around people who are interested in learning how they can build better, like our tagline is a community of community builders. So if someone wants to build, like you're building a community through your podcast, you may come like, who can I connect with? Who can I learn? What can I learn to make my community stronger? And so that's our goal. And those are the people that we invite to be a part of Hope Makers.
Well, what I love is there's a bit of a full circle. It's as if, you know, and I won't give away the stories in your TEDx, but it's, you know, it's experiences that you have as a father in a car, and the moments when we either lean into the 95% and not the 5% that then provide a runway for experience and lessons to be learned, and that you've taken that and you've woven that through business and brought it back into building community, which allows you to have more conversations with people where it feels as if you're in the living room with you. And I think that's very powerful. I think it's very sustainable in a world now where Gen Z is looking purpose over profits. We want to talk about sustainability. It's not just about turning the lights off when we leave a room. It's about sustainability in our relationships. And I think the way in which we apply it, and I think you're doing that in spades. I want to encourage people, you can go to hopemakerscollective.com. We want to thank Greg Zlevor. Greg, what a great conversation. Thank you for being transparent. It was everything that I was hoping and expected. Again, a great pleasure to spend some time with you. Thanks so much.
If you don't mind, I actually have 2 more 50% off coupons if people feel like the values.
Okay.
If people want, they can use the code capital H, capital M, capital M-2 when they go to the website. There's 2 more coupons for 50% off if anyone wants to join.
Okay.
They fit the values, right?
Yeah.
You gotta be. Don't come and pitch your stuff.
It's not about that. And I think that is
the relationships. Yeah.
That's incredibly valuable. Not monetarily. I don't mean that. I just mean from the perspective of the experience and the ultimate community that you will be a part of. Again, we want to thank Greg Zlevor. I am your host, Dr. Rod Berger.
Thanks for taking the plunge into HeadRoom, where we uncover the why behind the what and who impacting our lives. HeadRoom is a production of Rainlight and co-produced by our friends at Old Soul. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and this is HeadRoom.